to Anna Powell from Clear Horizon to talk to you about evaluation.
Okay, evaluation. So it's probably worth saying that, to our understanding, this was the first time a user-centred design approach was used for this level of policy making, in Australia. So there was a lot of, as a context, that's quite a big challenge. It was also then the first time that we evaluated a user-centred design project for policy making. So we had a journey of learning ourselves. In terms of why did the department want evaluation, I guess there were what we uncovered was there are three real priorities. So one was around the department was really truly committed to its own organisational learning. They had a question around, well, really what is the value of user-centred design, human-centred design for policy making, and to what extent are we as a department ready and capable for this? Goes to the next one. So understanding the value of it. Back. Also learning around, well, how, if there's such a big investment in this, how do we actually evaluate a design project, especially an early stage design project? So that's really the context which we were all embarking on. And through it, it's probably safe to say we've learned a lot more about how to scope out and what evaluation can and cannot actually be useful for in a project like this. Next one. So what did we actually evaluate? So you heard Hannah talk about one of the key priorities was the team building their capability in design, both the business improvement team but also the subject matter experts as well. So we were looking at that, the extent to which the learning by doing process helped people build their capability, and in what areas of design capability. The extent to which the project itself added value to the policy making. And we were really open to what that might look like, whether it was about new knowledge, new solutions, or some of the ripples that might happen across the organisation as a result of it. But then also specifically the value of the ideas and the early stage prototypes in themselves. And we're really curious. And again, a lot of the priorities for evaluation was set at the start of the project before we even knew where we might end up. But what we'll keep an eye out for is, what's the promising factor in the early stage prototypes. Now, as I mentioned, the broader ripples. So in evaluation, we can be very clear on what we might want to measure, and we look at our outcomes, and we say, well, let's make sure it's keeping sight on those. But we also keep an eye out on what we didn't intend to achieve as well, and we try to capture those. So how do we do this? And I should say, I won't talk about what we found. Similarly, that's going through a process, but I can talk about what we did. So this maps Michelle's process at the top there that they did as designers. I guess in some ways, just to kind of characterise our roles, what in hindsight we did is we put a few different hats on at different points of time, and felt a lot of the time like we're trying to say, hey designers, you're doing this amazing crazy stuff, can we come be a part of that? So and some of the hats that we were wearing in that were, I won't go into too much detail about evaluation jargon, but there's a thing called a developmental evaluation, which is this new evaluators getting really excited about how they might be useful. So developmental evaluation is more real time, and how do you actually feed information back in kind of real time where you can actually help the process. So it's great in design projects or early startup phases of projects. So we did a bit of that, which is really just inputting evaluative thinking here and there where you can. We kind of call it as like you get in the lab and you roll up your sleeves and you just get yourself dirty with it, okay? Which is different to how a lot of evaluators work, which is more this sort of process, sometimes capability building kind of evaluation, where you normally stand at arm's length and you observe and you then write a very judgy kind of report at the end and you submit it to the funder, okay? And there's a role for both. And what we learned is it's actually interesting to think through what you actually need. But we just did a bit of both. So some examples of how we did that was in the early stage research design, to help scope out what the discovery might look like. Clear Horizon did a literature review just to kind of try and get a bit of a lay of the land as to what the department might already know, what might be out there in the world. Also, the project very early on, we did theory of change, and some of you, that might just sound like a bunch of jargon, but essentially it's a view of how does change, a theory of how does change work, that setting out your outcomes and the cause and effect of how you're going to achieve those outcomes. So we did that for both the actual policy, the job active policy, but also for the design project itself, because that helped us get the scaffold for what are the outcomes we're looking for, both for the department through the project, but also what are the outcomes that the policy itself are trying to create, because that could help us potentially down the track when we start looking at ideation and the opportunity areas to know, well, what are we actually trying to develop opportunity areas for? And I understand as designers, a lot of you might use theory of change in different ways, and sometimes people call it program logic, in case that rings any bell. So we did theory of change early on as well. We also did some baseline interviews with the project team. That was mainly around the capability building, and it also helped scope out the evaluation. So then we threw a few things in there. Occasionally we kept iterating the job active theory of change. So as new insights came from the field, my colleague and I, one workshop when Michelle was weaving her magic with all the insights coming up around the room, we sat in the corner with our theory of change, updating it. And at the end of the workshop we said, so, this is where you were at the start, and then this is actually your new insights that you've gained from the field and how you might be kind of refining your idea of what outcomes are. We also then, when they started looking at the opportunity areas, one exercise we did is we mapped the opportunity areas onto the theory of change, so we could see, well, where are the opportunities overlaying with the types of outcomes, and another view to see what kind of leverage points you might want to target as well. So that's theory of change that kind of weaved across there. I guess the other thing, there were debriefs in the field, there was a field book, and we threw in some evaluative thinking questions in there. Some were useful, some probably were less useful. Again, a challenge is as things move in the field, as evaluators, we were sitting back at our desks in Sydney or Melbourne. So, the iterative nature of evaluation, we probably didn't keep up as much as we could have with that. But just a taste of what could have, what we could do more of as well. So feeding evaluative questions into the prototyping as well. Again, it depends on the length, the type of stage the prototype's at, but we just did very early stage prototyping, so that was more just some checking in questions there. And then we facilitated some reflections where we got the lab coat on, sleeves rolled up, as more about reflective processes toward the end, as well as then we put our judgy hats on and we wrote the report. Against the criteria that we set at the very start of the project before we even really knew what we were embarking on. So we wrote a very judgy report based on early criteria, as well as got in the middle of the whole thing as well. Which I guess leads to the next point around insights. So we then, actually last week with Taxi, Clear Horizon, ran a 3-day workshop on design and evaluation. And a lot of that built off learning from this project that both organisations found. And one of the key insights we really found is to be clear about what types of evaluation you need. We did all of the key main ones of evaluation. But, you could definitely start to scope out more of what's useful. Is it to be embedded within the team, or is it about that sort of formal report that authorises the work back into government? Government likes the report. Having a report, it can sometimes validate the funds and the investment. But what's most useful for organisational learning? So there's different types of evaluation you could use. And then, as mentioned there, something's interesting is, I guess, Michelle and I reflected at times around the sort of critical friend role. I was partly inside, outside. And I guess that was a bit of an aha halfway through. We started reflecting on that was actually a bit of an accidental role, but in terms of playing that critical friend. But I was sometimes very much facing toward Michelle and Taxi rather than toward the client. So the client was almost the report, and the developmental evaluation was about Taxi. And then, the useful tools and methods. The main aha we've had through a number of these projects actually is around the value of iterative theory of change. I won't go into what theory of change is, and I think Sarah did a workshop here on theory of change. But theory of change, and I don't know if you've got questions around how do you evaluate prototypes. Again, theory of change can be used. Get really clear on what outcomes you're trying to work towards, and then you can wrap evaluation toward that. So I think that's my last slide. Yeah.
I just wanted to layer on to what Anna said. There are three things there that Hannah had reiterated that I cut out of the video, which is why it stopped so short. But one was she found the role of that critical fin really valuable as well in the evaluation approach, and so that having that was pretty incredible and useful for them too. Then Anna didn't want to go too much into the theory of change, but just to give you an example of how important it became to us, and it is, and how foundational it is for understanding what's at the heart of a service you're trying to deliver and knowing whether or not it is actually delivering. Those 5 themes that I rattled off to you, those are all outcomes. Those actually are the central organizing themes of our theory of change. Can a person walk in both worlds? Are they set up for success in work? Is the job matching appropriate? Is the have their life barriers been addressed? And is change and innovation and Indigenous outcomes, is it supported by the department? Those can all be measured. And so that then forms the depth, and our entire report is organized around that. And so there's huge amounts of depth of things that can be measured to understand whether or not we're making any progress. Then the last point I wanted to reiterate was just the importance of using evaluation for design. So governments have a need to have evidence that their services work, that changes work, and you also have to build up that case. Well, if you think about the design process, when you go out and prototype, you think about, well, how do I know this prototype is successful? And you have some, you either break the prototype or you're like, oh, I changed it this way or I changed it that way. Something in there is measurable, even if it's qualitative. That forms the basis of developmental evaluation for design. So if you can track all through your design process the rationale for what you changed and why, you're actually able to build that evidence base, which is what government needs to create that argument for a new policy that they want to put in place, or how they might change a service, or how they might actually, completely redesign a commissioning approach. So that's actually the fundamental to being able to use design in context with governments, is having it paired with evaluation.